The shrill sound of the phone ringing sliced through the silence of the apartment. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she answered, the voice on the other end cold and unfamiliar. "Your mother's dead." The words hit like a thunderclap, leaving no room for understanding. She hadn't been prepared for this, never imagined it would come so suddenly. Her mother, the only person who had cared for her, was gone. She staggered back, gripping the kitchen counter, barely able to breathe. The news felt like a betrayal in itself, too raw, too immediate. "It's over," the voice on the other end added before hanging up. Tears blurred Sarah's vision, and all she could feel was an overwhelming sense of loss. Her mother had died, and with it, her entire world had shattered. Sarah was lost. She had nothing left, no family, no home, no direction. Her mother had been the one constant in her life, and now, that foundation had crumbled. But amidst the pain and the sorrow, something else stirred inside her, a deep, burning need for survival. She wasn't sure where this fire came from or why it burned so brightly, but it was there, pushing her forward when all she wanted to do was collapse into the darkness. The world had taken so much from her, but Sarah refused to let it take her spirit. She could survive this. She had to. "I won't let her death be in vain," Sarah said, her voice trembling but determined. "I'll find a way out of this. I'll make a life for myself, no matter what it takes." That promise to herself would be the thing that kept her going in the days to come, as the weight of her loss continued to bear down on her. In the days that followed, Sarah's life felt like a blur. She found herself doing whatever she could to survive, taking odd jobs, begging for help, anything to keep moving forward. But every door she tried to open seemed to slam shut in her face. No one wanted to offer a hand to someone like her, a poor girl with no family, no connections, no future. At every turn she encountered rejection, indifference, and the harshness of a world that didn't care. But then, she met Carla. Carla had seen Sarah's struggle and offered her a job in a small run-down diner on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "You're going to have to work hard," Carla warned her, "but if you're willing, this could be your chance to make something of yourself." Sarah didn't have much, but she had this, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Sarah's life in the diner began to take shape, but her struggles weren't over. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the back room, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Carla was talking to a man in a suit, discussing Sarah's background. "She doesn't know, does she?" the man asked, his voice low and conspiratorial. "She has no idea who her real father is." The words froze Sarah in her tracks. Her heart raced, and her mind went blank. All her life, she had been told her mother had no family, no connections. But this man, whoever he was, knew something she didn't. The truth about her past, about her father, had been hidden from her all these years. And now, it was about to unravel everything she thought she knew. Sarah couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She needed to know who her father was, and why her mother had kept it a secret. The following days were filled with frantic searching, digging into old records and asking questions. She learned that her father was a wealthy businessman, someone who could have changed her life if he'd ever cared enough to claim her. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized her mother had hidden this truth for a reason. And the more Sarah uncovered, the more she saw how her life had been shaped by the lies of those who were supposed to protect her. She was no longer just a victim of her circumstances. She was a survivor, and she would use everything she had learned to take control of her future. The discovery that her father was alive, and that her mother had hidden his identity from her, left Sarah with more questions than answers. She couldn't rest not knowing the truth. She spent every free moment tracking down leads, sifting through old documents, and making calls. One evening, while at the local library, she found a name. His name, Gregory Harris. It was a name tied to wealth, power, and a legacy that could have given her a life she could only dream of. The more she learned about Gregory Harris, the more she realized that he was a man who had everything, except, it seemed, the will to acknowledge his own daughter. Sarah felt her blood boil. How could a man so powerful abandon her mother like that? How could he leave her to grow up in poverty without ever offering help? The anger in her heart burned like a fire, and she knew that she couldn't just let him remain a faceless figure in her life. She needed to confront him. But first, she needed to understand why. The decision to confront Gregory Harris was not made lightly. After weeks of research and gathering evidence, Sarah stood outside a grand office building, looking up at the towering structure. This was the man who had, in one way or another, shaped her entire existence. She had to know why he abandoned her, and she had to hear it from him. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The receptionist gave her a polite but uninterested smile as she announced her purpose. "I am here to speak with Mr. Harris. It's urgent." The receptionist hesitated, but soon enough, Sarah was escorted into a sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. There, sitting behind a desk, was Gregory Harris, a man in his mid-40s, well-dressed, confident, and entirely unbothered by her presence. He looked at her with a practiced cold smile. "What is it you want, miss?" he began. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she managed to answer through clenched teeth. "I'm your daughter," she said. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Gregory Harris didn't move. Gregory Harris didn't seem surprised by Sarah's revelation. "Your mother never told you," he said, his voice cold but somewhat distant. "I thought she would have. It's all ancient history now." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The man who was supposed to be her father was dismissive, as if she was a mere inconvenience. She could feel the sting of his indifference deep within her. "Why?" Sarah demanded, her voice cracking. "Why did you leave us? Why did you abandon me?" Gregory's expression hardened, but he leaned back in his chair as though choosing his words carefully. "Your mother and we weren't meant to be," he said with a shrug. "You were a mistake." The words cut through Sarah like a blade. She had hoped for some semblance of remorse, an explanation that might have made sense of the pain she had carried all these years. But there was nothing. He was cold, indifferent, and it stung more than she could have imagined. As Sarah turned to leave, the door to the office opened, and a voice called out, "Wait." It was Gregory's assistant, a young woman who had been silent during their conversation. She stepped forward, holding out a manila envelope. "Mr. Harris wanted you to have this," she said, her voice soft but serious. Sarah's curiosity piqued, and she took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were documents, photographs, letters, and a series of legal papers detailing a trust fund set up for her. The realization hit her like a wave. Gregory had known about her all along. He had kept her in the dark, hidden away, but he had provided for her. In a twisted way, he had been watching her, keeping her in the shadows, as if she were some sort of secret he could never fully acknowledge. Sarah felt sick to her stomach, but the pain mixed with a strange sense of relief. For the first time, she realized she had the power to decide what came next. Her father's gift was more of a curse, but now she had the choice to make it work for her. "You never had to hide me," Sarah said softly, staring at the papers in her hands. Walking out of the office building, Sarah's steps felt heavier than before. She hadn't expected answers, but she hadn't expected the indifference either. It wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a betrayal of the truth. But even in the face of that pain, Sarah felt a shift inside her. The documents in her hand weren't just a reminder of a past she couldn't change. They were a key to her future. She wasn't a helpless victim anymore. She could make her own choices. The weight of her father's betrayal still hurt, but now it was something she could channel into strength. She could build a life for herself, even if it meant doing it without the family she had once dreamed of. "This ends now," Sarah said, her voice strong as she walked down the street, away from the shadows of her past and into the unknown. Sarah stood outside the small apartment building that would become her new home. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The space was cramped and simple, with peeling walls and flickering lights, but it offered the sense of independence she had been craving. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was a life of her own. She could feel the weight of the past lifting, bit by bit, as she moved in and started organizing her meager belongings. The trust fund her father had set up for her wasn't the life-changing wealth she had once dreamed of. It was a modest sum, enough to keep her afloat, to get her through the next few months. But it was a start, and that was enough for Sarah. "It's not much, but it's mine," she muttered to herself, setting down a box filled with clothes. She hadn't come this far to give up now. The battle for survival had just begun, and Sarah was ready to face it head-on. Her first day at work was nothing like what she had imagined. The diner was loud, the floor sticky, and the customers impatient. But Sarah put on her best smile and got to work. Carla, the diner owner, had given her the job, and it was the first real opportunity Sarah had since her mother passed. But as the day wore on, Sarah found herself questioning if this was all she was capable of. She hadn't gone to college, hadn't had the opportunities others had. She had always been a survivor, but this felt like a never-ending loop of struggle. "You're doing great, Sarah," Carla said, patting her on the back as they cleaned up at the end of the day. Sarah nodded, though her exhaustion was evident. She wasn't sure if she was doing great. She wasn't even sure if she could keep this up. But she had no choice. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about getting through each day. "I'm still here," Sarah said quietly to herself as she walked home that night. It wasn't much, but it was something. Just when Sarah thought she had gained some control over her life, a figure from her past appeared, shattering her fragile peace. It was him, Aaron, her former boyfriend. The last person she expected to see after everything had happened. He looked different, older, but his familiar manipulative smile remained. "Sarah, I've been thinking about you," Aaron said, his voice smooth as always. Sarah froze. He had always known how to play on her vulnerabilities. "I know things have been tough for you, but I'm here now. I can help you." The words hung in the air, as sweet as poison. Sarah could feel the old pull, the temptation to fall back into the cycle of needing him. But something inside her had changed. She had fought too hard to let him back in. "I don't need your help," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I'm doing fine on my own." Aaron's expression faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "We'll see about that," he muttered as he walked away. Sarah watched him leave, a mixture of anger and relief flooding through her. He was still the same, a reminder of the past she was trying to escape. But now, she had the strength to shut the door on him once and for all. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's life became a blur of work and survival. But one evening, everything became too much. As she walked home from her second job, exhaustion weighing her down, the world seemed to close in on her. She stumbled, feeling like the weight of her past was crushing her. Her father's betrayal, her mother's death, the constant struggle. It was all too much. She collapsed onto a bench in the park, her head in her hands. "Why is this so hard?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Just as she felt like she couldn't go any further, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You don't have to do this alone." It was Carla. She had followed Sarah after her shift. "I know things are tough, but you've come so far. You're stronger than you realize." Sarah looked up at her, her heart heavy but grateful. "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "I feel like I'm breaking." Carla sat beside her, offering a silent support. "Even the strongest people need someone to lean on sometimes," Carla said softly. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." The weight didn't lift entirely, but the simple act of not being alone was enough to keep Sarah from falling apart. Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope in front of her. It was an invitation to an interview at a local nonprofit, a real opportunity to build a career and make a difference. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the first step towards something more. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt the spark of hope. "This could be it," she whispered to herself, her fingers nervously brushing the paper. She had worked hard for this moment, and now it was time to step up. "I can do this," she said quietly, standing tall. The future wasn't certain, but the first step was clear. She was going to fight for her future no matter what. The day of the interview arrived, and Sarah's nerves were on edge. She had prepared as much as she could, but standing outside the building, she felt small. The nonprofit's headquarters were towering, glass and steel monoliths that seemed to mock her humble beginnings. But she had worked too hard to let fear stop her now. With a deep breath, she entered the building. As soon as she walked through the door, the air of professionalism was overwhelming. She was led into a sleek conference room where the interview panel sat waiting. The questions began, probing into her past, her experiences, and her aspirations. Each word she spoke felt like a battle. But as the interview continued, Sarah began to feel something she hadn't in a long time. A sense of belonging. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, she was fighting to make a difference. "I know what it's like to struggle," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But I also know what it's like to keep going no matter what. I'm not giving up." When the interview ended, the panel thanked her, and she left, heart pounding. Whether she got the job or not, Sarah knew that she had finally taken control of her future. Despite the hopeful interview, doubts began to creep into Sarah's mind. What if she wasn't enough? What if her past, her lack of experience and her poverty, disqualified her? She sat in her apartment, looking over the city skyline, but the weight of the world seemed to press down on her. "I've worked so hard," she muttered to herself, but the words felt empty. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Carla. "You've already proven how strong you are. Whatever happens, you've come this far. Don't doubt yourself now." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, feeling a wave of gratitude. Carla's words were simple, but they were exactly what she needed to hear. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She was building something, piece by piece. "I'm too far to stop now," Sarah whispered, standing up. She wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. Just as Sarah began to find her footing, Aaron reappeared. He knocked on her door late one evening, his face soft but full of the same manipulative charm that had once drawn her in. "Sarah, I've been thinking," Aaron started, his voice low and apologetic. "I was wrong about everything. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I've changed." For a moment, Sarah's heart fluttered. She remembered the way Aaron had made her feel, the way he had convinced her that she needed him. But now, looking at him, the truth was clear. He hadn't changed. He was just using his charm to pull her back into his orbit. "I don't need you anymore, Aaron," Sarah said firmly, her voice strong despite the old feeling stirring. "I'm not the same person I was when you left." Aaron's face faltered, and for a moment there was something almost vulnerable in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he warned, but Sarah was already closing the door. She wasn't going to let him back into her life. Not now. Not ever. A week later, Sarah's phone rang with the news she had been waiting for. The nonprofit had offered her the job. She could hardly believe it at first, staring at the phone in disbelief. "I did it," she whispered to herself, feeling a rush of emotion flood over her. This was her chance, her real chance to build a future. The weight of all her struggles, the pain, the rejection, it all seemed to fall away in that moment. She had earned this, and no one could take it from her. As she hung up the phone, she felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was truly moving forward. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. "This is only the beginning," she said aloud, a determined smile crossing her face. The job wasn't easy. It required long hours, difficult decisions, and facing some of the harsh realities of the world she had stepped into. But for Sarah, it felt worth it. Every challenge, every obstacle, she faced head-on. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned. She was a woman who had clawed her way up from the bottom. And as she sat at her desk, working late into the night, she realized that the price of survival was high. But it was a price she was willing to pay. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Her past might have shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She was the architect of her own future now, and nothing could stand in her way. "I've survived it all," Sarah said quietly, looking out the window at the city that never stopped moving. "And I'm just getting started." Sarah had worked hard to prove herself in the nonprofit world. Her new job gave her the chance to help people who were struggling, just like she had. But the pressure began to mount. The higher she climbed, the more she felt the weight of expectations, both from others and herself. The job wasn't just about doing good anymore. It was about delivering results. There were deadlines to meet, budgets to balance, and a constant stream of decisions to make. On top of that, the memories of her past crept back, uninvited. Sometimes when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the person staring back. She had spent so many years surviving, but now she had to learn how to live. To succeed without losing herself. I never imagined it would be like this, Sarah thought to herself late one evening, staring at the paperwork on her desk. But I can't stop now. I've come too far. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for another stack of files. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the life she was building, but she knew she didn't have a choice. The world kept moving, and so did she. The pressure continued to build, and Sarah found herself becoming more distant from those who had been her support system. She pushed away Carla's phone calls, barely responded to Alice's texts, and even stopped visiting the small diner where she had once worked. She wasn't doing it on purpose, but she was becoming consumed by the need to succeed, the need to prove herself. The problem was, the more she worked, the more she felt the old wounds reopen. She thought she had moved past her father's abandonment, past the betrayal of Aaron, but every late night and every stressful meeting seemed to bring the memories flooding back. The more she pushed herself, the more she realized she was losing the very thing she had fought to protect, her sense of self. "I'm not sure who I am anymore," she whispered to herself one night, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The girl who had fought for survival, the girl who had dreamed of a different life, seemed to be slipping away. But Sarah refused to let that happen. She couldn't lose herself again. "I'm not going back," she muttered. "I'm not going back." The breaking point came one fateful day when Sarah received a call from her old friend, Carla. "Sarah, we need to talk," Carla said, her voice filled with concern. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. You're not the person you used to be. And I don't want to see you lose yourself again." For the first time in weeks, Sarah stopped and listened. Carla's words hit her like a lightning bolt. She had been so caught up in proving herself that she hadn't seen how much she was losing in the process. "I'm fine," Sarah said, her voice more defensive than she intended. But Carla wasn't backing down. "You've done amazing things, but don't let it destroy you. You're not just a worker. You're not just surviving. You're a person with dreams, and you deserve to take care of yourself too." For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a sense of relief. The words weren't a judgment. They were a wake-up call. "I've forgotten who I am," Sarah admitted, her voice quiet but real. "But I can't keep going like this." And with that realization, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to let herself become a casualty of her own success. Sarah knew what she had to do. She couldn't continue to bury her past under the weight of her responsibilities. She needed to confront it. She needed to heal. The next day, she visited her mother's grave. Standing there in the quiet, Sarah spoke aloud for the first time in years. "I don't know how to forgive you for leaving me like you did, but I'm going to try." The tears came in waves, each one carrying away a little piece of the anger, the sadness, and the guilt she had been carrying. She had spent so much time focusing on surviving that she hadn't realized she was still living in the shadow of her past. But now she could see the light. A light that wasn't just about survival, but about living. "I'm not broken," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "I'm still here." And in that moment, Sarah felt a shift. The past wasn't something she could undo, but it didn't have to control her anymore. She was ready to take control of her future. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah began to rebuild. She didn't quit her job, but she stopped letting it define her. She started reconnecting with the people who had always been there for her, like Carla and Alice. They helped her see that success wasn't about perfection. It was about balance. And slowly, Sarah started finding that balance. She spent more time taking care of herself, pursuing the passions she had put on hold for so long. She started volunteering again, helping others who were struggling, just as she once had. She had found a way to heal, and in doing so, she found a sense of peace she had never known before. "I'm doing this for me," she said one evening, standing on her apartment balcony gazing at the city below. "And that's enough." The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt ready to face it. Sarah felt the ripple of change moving through her life, but it was never as simple as she'd hoped. As she settled into her new routine, balancing work, personal growth, and giving back to others, the challenge of change became clear. She had faced the past and learned how to survive, but now she had to learn how to live without the burden of guilt and fear. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about thriving. But despite her progress, doubts began to creep in. What if I'm just fooling myself? Sarah thought as she walked through the city, heading to her evening volunteer shift. What if I can't keep this up? But as she stepped into the small community center, she saw the faces of the people she was helping, and something inside her shifted again. She wasn't just surviving. She was making a difference. "I have a chance now," she whispered to herself. "I can make it count." One day, while working at the community center, Sarah met someone unexpected. Elijah, a former addict who had turned his life around and was now helping others like him. Elijah was rough around the edges, but had a quiet wisdom about him. Over the next few weeks they worked closely together, and Sarah learned from him more than she had expected. "You know, when I was where you are now, I thought I had to do everything on my own," Elijah said one evening as they cleaned up after a group therapy session. "But the truth is you can't. You can't heal in isolation. We need people." Elijah's words stuck with Sarah. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on doing things alone. But she realized now that she had been missing something vital: connection. "Maybe I've been pushing people away too much," Sarah thought to herself. "Maybe I don't have to do this alone." With Elijah's quiet encouragement, Sarah began to embrace the support she had been resisting for so long. Just as Sarah began to feel the weight of her past lift, Aaron came back into her life. This time, he wasn't offering apologies or promises. He was demanding something. "I've got nothing left, Sarah," Aaron said, standing in front of her apartment building. His voice was desperate, his face haggard. "I need you to help me. You've got money, you've got connections. Please, just this once." Sarah recoiled at the sight of him. The man who had once manipulated her was now trying to do it again. "You think you can just walk back into my life whenever you want?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. "I'm not going to help you, Aaron. Not anymore." Aaron's face faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "You'll regret this," he spat, turning and walking away. Sarah stood there watching him leave, a mixture of anger and relief washing over her. She had stood up to him, and for the first time, it felt like a victory. "No more," Sarah whispered to herself. "No more letting him control me." As the months passed, Sarah began to notice the toll her survival had taken. She had moved forward, but the emotional scars were still there. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by papers from her work and volunteer projects, she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was still running. Running from the pain, running from the past. She had built herself up from nothing, but now she had to face the truth. No amount of work, no amount of good deeds could erase the past. "I'm doing everything right, but why do I still feel so lost?" Sarah thought, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to grieve. Grieve for the girl who had been abandoned, for the person who had been left behind. "I've fought so hard to survive," she whispered to herself. "But maybe it's time I start fighting to heal." The realization hit her like a flood. She had been so focused on surviving that she hadn't let herself truly feel. "I'm still here," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "And I'm going to heal." The final step in Sarah's journey wasn't about escaping the past or proving herself to anyone. It was about accepting who she was and embracing the person she had become. She stood in front of the mirror one evening, finally allowing herself to see the woman who had fought through years of hardship. "You're not perfect," Sarah said quietly, her reflection showing a woman who was scarred but strong. But you've survived, and that's something. With a final deep breath, she walked away from the mirror. She was no longer living for survival. She was living for herself. And as she closed the door behind her, Sarah knew that the next chapter of her life was ready to begin. She had survived, but now she would truly live. It had been months since Sarah had let go of her past, and as she walked into her new office, she felt a surge of empowerment she had never known before. The nonprofit had expanded, and they had offered her a higher position, one that allowed her to influence change on a broader scale. This new chapter felt like a culmination of everything she had fought for. She had survived, she had healed, and now she was in a position to help others do the same. "I never thought I'd be here," Sarah whispered to herself as she sat behind her new desk, her fingers tracing the edge. The walls of her office were filled with personal touches, pictures of the people she had helped, the friends who had supported her, and the future she was now determined to build. "I'm not the same person who walked in here all those months ago," she thought. The person she was now wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, and she was ready to take on the next challenge. Sarah's new position allowed her to implement programs that helped people in the community, those who were once like her, struggling to make ends meet, to overcome their pasts. As she met with clients and mentors, her vision for the future began to take shape. It's not just about giving people resources, she realized during one of her sessions. It's about empowering them to take control of their own lives. The programs she implemented were a mixture of personal development, job training, and mentorship, but the underlying theme was always the same: empowering others to rise above their circumstances. And as she saw the first few participants begin to succeed, Sarah felt something in her stir. She wasn't just giving people a second chance, she was helping them see that their story didn't have to end with defeat. They, too, could rise from the ashes of their pasts. She had found her true calling, to help others heal and find their power. One evening, while working late, Sarah came across an old photograph of her and her mother. The image was blurry, taken many years ago, but the memories it brought back were crystal clear. The warmth of her mother's love, the sense of security she had once felt, it was all there, frozen in time. But Sarah wasn't bitter anymore. She had spent so many years angry at her mother for the way things had turned out, for leaving her to face the world alone. But now, as she held the photo in her hands, she realized something. Her mother had done the best she could. She had her own struggles, her own demons. And Sarah had to forgive her, not for her mother's sake, but for her own. Forgiveness was the final step. "I'm ready to let you go," Sarah whispered, finally at peace. She wasn't erasing the past. She was accepting it, and in doing so, releasing herself from the chains it had kept her bound by for so long. The ghosts of the past no longer had control over her. It was hard to admit, but Sarah had been running from her relationships for a long time. She had pushed away those who cared for her because she was afraid of getting hurt again. But now, she knew that healing didn't mean isolating herself. She had to rebuild the relationships she had neglected. The first step was reconnecting with Alice, her best friend. After a long conversation over coffee, Alice said, "I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've come so far, but you've also been carrying a lot on your own." Alice was right. She had been carrying everything, her pain, her guilt, her hope, all alone. But now, she was learning to share the load. "I don't want to be alone anymore," Sarah admitted. Alice smiled softly. "No, mine. You never have to be alone, Sarah. You've got me." And with that simple truth, Sarah realized that she wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was rebuilding her relationships, starting with the one that had always been there. As Sarah looked back at how far she had come, she realized that everything she had been through had shaped her into the person she was today. She had been broken, betrayed, and abandoned. But she had survived. She had healed. And now, she was thriving. The woman who had once been filled with doubt and fear was now a woman of strength and purpose. She had reclaimed her life, her power, and her future. Standing at the edge of her balcony, watching the city below, Sarah knew that she was ready for whatever came next. This is just the beginning, she thought. I'm ready to live, not just survive. With that, she stepped back inside, ready to embrace the future with open arms. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she had the strength to face them.